In this video, we're going to go over point binding. Now, point binding is a binding method that gives you more control when you don't want to just bind a layer or want to use the influence of bone strength through the flexi binding method. So to use this method, I'm going to come over here to our group and I'm going to go ahead and expand that. And I'm going to work on this front leg right here. So let's go ahead and let's zoom into this leg and let's select the leg layer. So we have leg and foot front. I'm going to go ahead and expand that group. And for starters, I'm just going to use the leg front. So as you can see, when I select a layer, I have all the points that are now showing that we have drawn. Now what I'm going to do is with either B on the keyboard or selecting the select bone tool, I'm going to go ahead and select the bone of this leg right here, this top bone. So with the thigh front bone now selected, I now have to decide with point binding, what points is this bone going to control? Now I know for this top bone, if we're thinking about this anatomically, it's just going to control this thigh. So then what I'm going to do is with this layer selected, with that bone selected, I'm going to come over here to the bone panel and I'm going to select this icon right here, which is bind points or I on the keyboard. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And now what you're going to see is you're going to see each one of these bones have a distinct color. And now the reason for this is pretty cool. It's so that you can tell which points are bound to which bone. Now with that icon selected and that bone selected, I'm going to go ahead and left click and drag and select those 3 top points. Now you can see that these points are selected. Now I can bind them. So I'm going to come up here to the bind points tool or enter on the keyboard. And now those points are bound. So if I hit escape on my keyboard, they're now matching the color of the bone that they're bound to. So let's go ahead and do the same thing with this leg right here. So again, one important thing about bones is to realize where the rotation point is. The rotation point is right here at the tip of this bone. So I want this bone right here to act as the knee joint and the rest of the bone for this leg. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Alt. I'm going to hit Alt and I'm going to click that bone to select it, or you can use the select bone tool. And then I'm going to come over here to the bind points tool and I'm going to left click and I'm going to drag out a box over top of those bones. Now let's say you have something a little bit more complicated. If you want to use a different selection method, you can either click on the lasso mode here, or you can hold down Control, and that'll give you more control of points that you want to select. So I'm going to go ahead and again select those points, come up here to the bind points button. I'm going to go ahead and click that, and then I'm going to hit escape to deselect those points. And now you can see that I have yellow points that are bound to this yellow bone. So bind points doesn't require any bone strength. It's going to simply be bound to these bones. So what I can do now is I can come back here to the main bone layer and I can hit Z on the keyboard for my transform points tool. And for right now, go ahead and ignore the strength that you are seeing. We'll fix that a little bit later for both the point binding and the layer binding. They both don't require bone strength. But for right now, I'm just going to test this. So I'm going to grab this top leg here with Z on the keyboard and I'm going to move it. And you can see it's moving totally fine. Again, ignore all the different pieces, the other moving pieces. That just means that they haven't been bound yet. And then I'm going to come down here to the bottom of the leg and I'm going to rotate that. We need to add that curvature with our curvature tool. I'm going to go ahead and rotate that and you can see what it's doing. You can see what points that this bone is bound to just by the rotation of this leg. So again, just like what we did with the arm, let's go ahead into the leg front layer itself. And let's select those points. So I'm going to use my select point tool or G on the keyboard, select those points, hit C on the keyboard, and then I'm going to come up here and click on the smooth button. So now when I go ahead back to the bone layer and I hit Z on the keyboard and I move this, you can now see it's working just a little bit better. It doesn't look quite as good, and because we can't use bone strength, we don't have any control over this layer. And that's actually one of the huge advantages of flexi binding, is you can adjust the bone strength to also adjust the artwork here. I'm going to come here to the foot now, and I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to select the foot front layer, and now I have a little bit different of a decision of what points I want to move. I want these points to stay fairly intact with the rest of the leg, because I don't want the whole entire foot rotating at this pivot point here. So what I'm going to do with that layer selected, with the bone selected, I'm going to come here to the bind points tool and I'm going to hold Control on my keyboard and I'm going to select just the points that I want. So I want just these points right here. So with those 2 points now selected, I'm going to select my bind points button and I'm going to hit escape to deselect those points. And now I can see that those bones are now bound. But now these points right here aren't bound to anything. So what do I bind those to? Well, let's go ahead and let's test it first to see what it looks like. Okay, so it doesn't look quite right. So let's go ahead and select this bone right here for the bottom leg to bind this layer to. So I can actually bind more than one layer to the same bone. So what I first need to do is again select the front foot, so the point that I want to bind. With that bone selected, come here to our bind points icon, select those points, and bind those points. And now what you're going to see is two different binding selections. You can see that the sole of the shoe are bound to this bone, whereas the top of the shoe are now bound to the ankle bone. So let's go ahead and let's again test this just to see what it looks like. And you can see that looks a lot better as far as the connection of that foot to the rest of the leg. Now I want you to experiment with point binding or flexi binding on this leg here and just see what gives you the best result. That's the really cool thing about rigging, is you can have a ton of different techniques to help you come up with the same solution. It's all a matter of preference and what works best for you. But in the next video, we're gonna do a combination of all the binding methods for the body, and I'll see you there. Want to learn more in depth everything there is to know about the rigging tools in Moho, what they are, and how to use them? Then be sure to check out the complete rigging course to know exactly how to rig your character step by step. Want to take the course? Use promo code RIGGING2019 and get the course 50% off. Link is in the description.